We go.
All right, so we spent some time talking about the design process. So we spent a little time talking about problem definition. We talked a little bit about research, again, in kind of an upper level engineering course. We'd spend a little more time talking about research, patent searches, and I know I've certainly had some senior level courses where they brought in some of the STEM or engineering librarians to come in and talk to the students about utilizing databases and journal articles and things of that nature, and really have a much more robust research. I think for us, it's probably a bit much. Again, don't take that as, well, don't worry about the research. No, still, you need to understand what is the nature of what you're trying to what is the problem you're trying to solve, and what is the knowledge that exists for it. You still want to do that. I'm not saying blow it off, but just go out, find what's available on the internet, make sure you talk to your client, make sure you talk to Professor Gilbert, Professor Safadina, tell them about what you're doing, get kind of their insight about it, and make sure what is the scientific theory behind whatever your device is either testing or showing off. Make sure you have some understanding of what that is so you can have a better idea of what will work and what won't work for you. And then we spent some time last time talking about synthesis. And we talked about brainstorming being the most common, very powerful type of synthesis, not the only tool you can use to synthesize ideas together into a larger whole. In a future class, we'll spend a little time talking about concept evaluation. We're not quite there yet. We will. And then again, we'll take a day a little bit later in the semester. A little later in the semester. There's not too much of the semester left, but in a future class, we'll talk about writing a report. We'll talk about putting together your presentation. So there'll be some additional content we'll do. Of what we've got here, concept evaluation is kind of the last thing really to talk about. But notice that within this list, very important, powerful process we're using, there's no mention about leadership qualities, working together in a team, or setting goals, or figuring out how do we resolve conflicts within the group. Those aren't here, but it's important. It's important. If we look at leadership, we look at communication, we look at conflict resolution. These are all topics that in say like a business management program, we might have an entire 3-hour course on each one of those individual topics. I always like to chuckle and say, let's see how much we can do in about 20, 30 minutes, shall we? Let's at least highlight the biggest aspects of these three main concepts about teamwork, about leadership, and about conflict resolution. Let's at least hit some of the high points. So what I always do is challenge you to think about a group or a team that you've worked within, or maybe a professional sports team, or some sort of a gaming clan or collaborative that you've worked in, ones that were successful and ones that aren't successful. Right? And think about what makes each one of those successful. A lot of times in a good team, you've got a group of individuals that has an idea of what their strengths and what their weaknesses are, and they try to find ways to collaborate in such a way that somebody's strengths complements somebody else's weaknesses and vice versa. Everybody has an idea of what their role is, how they can leverage that role, what they bring to the table, and what they need out of their group members in order to support, and what they're also able to maybe grow and get a little bit better at. These are all things that you have to think about as an individual, and these are all things that at this point, hopefully you're starting to kind of get a feel for it within your group, but also feel free to have kind of that discussion about, hey, I know I said I could try to do this. I'm really struggling with this. I think I need help with this or this. Does anybody have some strengths in this? Is anybody better at this than I am? Maybe you can give me some pointers. I'm happy to grow. This is where I'm at. If you don't say these things, you're going to get about a week or two from now and up against a deadline, and everybody's going to be very upset because we didn't get things done. Communication, it's real easy for me to stand here and preach to you. Almost everything here can be solved with good communication. It's very easy for me to say that. I respect it's much more difficult to do, but I'm still going to sit here and preach to you. Communication's still going to solve about 80% of a lot of the problems you're going to come up with. And the other 20% is going to come down to just realizing that you actually have a problem and trying to communicate that out. And that is another challenge in of itself. But if we talk about what do we need to do to be successful as a team? In well-organized teams, successful teams, you will often find each group member has a pretty good idea of what their role is, what they should be doing, how they can contribute, or at least having, bring that topic up and saying, hey, how can I contribute? Or this is what I think I'm supposed to be doing. Is that not what we need me to be doing? These are all things that we should talk about. I always like to point to, here the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I can point to the center, and right now it's Hardenstein, and say, well, we're not winning because that guy's out there shooting 3-pointers, but then you got this 7-foot guy, Chet Holmgren, who actually shoots really good 3-pointers. And so it's like, sometimes that doesn't work. But all that to say, you've got individuals, they know what they can and can't do, and they know what they're asked to do. And they work together to try to get the right people on the court at the right time to do the things that are needed to be successful and also succeed against the other team, what the other team's bringing. Very similar for you guys. It's a different scale, but it's very similar. It's you're going to have people on your group that are going to be better at maybe running SolidWorks. You're going to have people that maybe you've got a part that doesn't need to be a real expert in SolidWorks. Maybe that's something somebody else can do while the expert's doing the complicated thing. Maybe you've got a group member that's better at organizing all the ideas to a point where at some point we can put it together in a report. It's, again, have some idea of what each group member's strengths and weaknesses are, talk about it, make sure you have some agreement on that. We mentioned earlier, make sure you as a group are on the same page as to what the problem you're solving is, and make sure you check in as you go through about, has that updated as you learn more about this, as you've looked at some different ideas, some things that would or wouldn't work. Are we still attacking the same problem statement, or does that need to be updated? It's perfectly okay if it needs to be updated, but if we don't talk about that, you can have half of you trying to solve one problem and half of you not. Or as you find smaller sub problems, make sure we agree on what those smaller sub problems that we start carving out and carving up all on. There's this point here about develop, excuse me, develop effective interpersonal relationships. Some of you have had my intro to engineering course, and in there I try to bring in guest speakers. I've got a pretty good group of students now that work over, former students, people have come through our program and graduated now and graduate their bachelor's. They're working at Tinker Air Force Base. And so I've got pretty good contacts there, and I try to bring in, I've gotten to where I try to bring in 2 or 3 from there, and then try to bring in some other former students that work at other places now. And in all cases, it's very common that those engineers working in the field will talk to those students about, look around the room, the people that are in the room right now with you and the people that are in like your calculus courses and your physics courses, probably the same people are going to go to the university where you go, and you may be in the same program, maybe you'll be in the same classes later on. If you build good bridges now, a guest speaker I used to have come talk to my intro class, he would say it's so much easier to maintain a bridge than it is to burn it down and build a new one. If you can maintain good relationships now, you never know when in a later course it's going to be helpful, or later on in your career when, hey, I got this guy I see on LinkedIn. I took heat transfer with this guy and he works at this company I want to go work for now. Hit that person up and say, hey, how do I not get auto rejected? My application not get auto rejected, right? What does your hiring process look like? How can I talk directly to the manager that would be hiring this position? Can you put me in touch with that person? There's nothing wrong with being able to do that. Okay. So keep all that in mind, not just the people in your group, but also the people in other groups and other classes that you're taking. There's going to be a lot of overlap, and you never know when that person that was in a group with you here ends up being a supervisor that has a job open that is an easy in for you then later. Okay. These are all things to think about. And then leadership roles, right? Make sure you've talked about what leadership in your group looks like. You have one person within your ranks there that has a natural set of leadership abilities. and doesn't mind taking on the role? Do you as a group just want to operate by consensus? And I've seen for projects of this scale, I've seen both work very effectively. As you get larger and more complex projects, you often will probably going to want some point person organizing all of the efforts, but it's up to you as a group how you want to operate. I'm fine with either one. I've certainly had some courses, and if I was teaching, say, a capstone class, each group would be selecting who their group leader is, and that group leader would be reporting out to me every week progress reports and what the team looks like. I'm asking you to do that kind of on an individual basis for some reasons this semester, but all that to say is as the projects get more and more complex, as your organizations get more and more complex, how we structure and organize leadership may become more and more complex. For you guys, just make sure you're in agreement as a group as to how you want leadership to look. Do you have one person that makes sense to serve as a leader? Are you okay? Are you operating well, operating by consensus? The real annoying thing is if one of you thinks they're the group leader and everybody else is like, no, we operate by consensus, and you haven't, again, talked about that, you haven't communicated that out. In a week or so, that's going to become, if it's not already a problem, it probably is, that's going to become a real issue. So make sure you've had a conversation, we're all on the same page about what leadership looks like. But in all cases, you are going to want to know, who's responsible for getting the equipment back to Mr. Lynch, who's responsible for, going to keep up with the prototypes or making sure that you get files to me so I can get them printed or my technicians get them printed. Make sure that you know what those look like if you don't have a point contact leader. Make sure those roles are clearly defined if you're operating by consensus. I'm perfectly fine with either one. If you want to elect a group leader and that group leader sends me a report every week, I'll give you feedback on it. But honestly, I'm pretty happy about how we've got the current structure built. I think we're getting a lot of that accomplished. So as I mentioned, our goal today is to kind of take these three very broad, complex topics and just give us a very quick smattering of basic, substantial information very quickly here. All that to say, good leadership qualities. I mean, we could fill the whole board full of good leadership qualities and still not get all of them. An entire 3-hour course about organizational leadership, those exist out there. And those are some, if you're wanting to go more the management route, that's trying to take some of those maybe as an elective wouldn't be a bad idea if that is of interest to you. These are some of my favorites, right? I always like to say good leadership qualities, AKA being a decent human being. Do what you say what you do. Do what you say what you do. I try desperately to live by that. I don't know that I always live up to it, but that's what I strive for. I mean, set the example. If I say I'm going to get something done, I do everything I can to try to get it done, because then it's difficult for me to go to somebody else and say, hey, you said you were going to do this thing. Where's the thing? If they can come right back and say, well, yeah, kind of like where's the thing that you said you were going to do? It's a lot easier to have that conversation. Say, hey, we're all, everybody here is trying to get their stuff done. Where are you at? Where is this at? What do you need from us to get this done? Plan the small wins. Plan the small wins. How do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece, one bite at a time. Right? All three of your projects are reasonably complex. They're all going to have some smaller sub problems you're going to carve them out into. And each of those sub problems, you're going to go through this process, a very similar process. What is this smaller problem? What is the theory behind it? What are some good solutions? What solutions can we do? Which one do we think is the best? So as you carve this elephant up, I think Mr. Lynch and I like to say a lot of these projects are deceptively simple, they're actually deceptively complicated when you really get broke down into, okay, what does success look like? As you break it down into the small wins, you will encounter challenges. And when you accomplish something, when you pull something off, when you get something done, make sure as a group, take it upon yourself to make sure we celebrate those things, right? Builds up good morale, builds up momentum, and allows us to tackle some of the more challenging things. I like to tell this story. I was taking a technical writing course and we had a project in there. and I was working with different people of different backgrounds. I think there was a computer science grad student. I think there was a gentleman that was an electrical engineer, and he was actually like some sort of scholar. It wasn't like a Truman, but maybe a Rhodes, like some high level performing individual. And he volunteered to take on the group leader role for our group, and he did this very well. And he was very emphatic about, all right, what are the small things we can carve out? We can start knocking those off and build up some momentum in the next week. I've always appreciated the way he did that. We look for, what were some of the easy wins? Not ignore the difficult things because they got to get done. But if we kind of start building up our ability to work together as a group to get some of these easy things, and we start figuring out, okay, who's in the group? What are we good at? Then as we start tackling the bigger things, that actually became a little bit easier. Right? Recognize individual accomplishments, contributions. If you got the quiet person in the group or somebody that's trying to figure out how they fit in or where they fit in or if they fit in, and if you see somebody else taking credit for something they've done or something they've said, or they've said something and somebody else just changes a few words and tries to steal the idea, don't be afraid to point that out. That you will find that will build up a really good group around you of individuals that will get things done if they know what they're bringing to the table gets recognized. Do your best to try to pick those off, because you guys most of you will go on to try to solve problems that are bigger than what you can do by yourself. That would be a goal for most of us. So that means you're going to need to be able to function in a group environment. So if you can build the others up around you, I've just learned that from experience over the years. I know early in my career, you guys haven't already figured out, I'm pretty arrogant. I think very highly of myself. I've tried to be much more humble in my older age. I've learned that if I will try to build up the people around me and get them to where they feel confident to operate at a higher level, we end up getting a lot more done as a group. I don't have to do near as much. So I'm somewhat being lazy. But with that said, no, I really don't feel like I'm being lazy. I still work my tail off, but you end up accomplishing. Okay. So when somebody does a good job, point that out. Point that out. Try to elevate that individual. Celebrate the accomplishments. So when we get something done, when you pull off one of the bigger wins, make sure it's clear, and we take a moment. We got things to do. We can't just like, oh, we're done halfway through. No, you have to get things done, but it makes it easier to keep pushing through if we know what we've done previously is going to be recognized. Again, conflict resolution, a very complex topic we can spend a lot of time talking about. Let's break it down to some of the simplest things and some of the things to really think about. Inevitably, we're working with a group, 4 individuals a lot of times. There's going to be differing opinions. There's going to be different points of view. How do we balance those? How do we manage those? Well, let's talk about kind of what this looks like. We're engineers, sciencey and mathy people. We like to plot things on graphs and point to correlations. If we look at most conflict resolution strategies, so forcing the issue, just getting out in front and confronting the issue, trying to reach some sort of a compromise, trying to smooth the issue over, just trying to make sure everybody's going to get along, and then just let's see what happens if it just goes away. We withdraw. These are kind of the common major categories of conflict resolution strategies. Some of these I wouldn't call strategies. But if you plot them on an XY axis, so preserving the relationship, we've already talked about that's important. Increasing preservation of the relationship going out on the x-axis, increasing getting the task accomplished here on the y-axis, going up, increasing. You always want to try to operate in this region as much as possible. Always try to operate in this region. Again, I warned you guys right up front. Communication solves about most of your problems, and that's easy for me to say, but it's harder to practice, but that is the truth. If you've got an issue, if you can try to figure out, okay, where are we at? Why is this not getting accomplished? What do you need? These are kind of the starting place, and that's kind of operating in this region. Hey, how can we help you? How can we get there? We just simply say, hey, there's an issue here. What are some solutions? How do we get to how do we move forward from this place? That's normally where you want to operate. As your time gets smooth, like as you have less and less time, as your time budget dwindles, the tendency is to work your way back this way, right? Um, just kind of be aware of the ramifications in both cases, right? You want to avoid operating here on the boundaries as much as possible. Sometimes we just get run out of time. You end up on one of the extremes. Either we make everybody upset because we got, accomplished, but just not the way we wanted to, or we just, what, it's fine. Let's just make sure everybody gets along and we'll suffer the consequences. And these are, again, these all directions you want to avoid. As much as you can, you want to operate out here. Just understand that as time gets less and less, it gets harder to move out in both directions. Okay. Doesn't mean you can't. It's just the natural tendency is it becomes more and more challenging. All right. So what do we do here? That's nice theory. How do we implement this? Here's some basic things to think about. You ever had that coach or the manager? I've certainly had some of these where I like to say the you suck at life guy. Fowler, this is terrible. You suck at life. You've got to get better. Okay. Well, for me, I'm one of these weird mind types that I will internalize and I'm like, well, how do I suck at life? How can I get better? And I'll actually try to dig down. I'll find ways I can get better. My wife, love her to death. Fantastic. She will just out of spite not do anything. You hit and run on her and she will out of spite make your life miserable, right? That becomes her mission. And what I'm saying to you is you have to understand what group members you're working with. I know from 20 plus years of teaching experience, there's a very slim part of the population that I can't actually go up to and say, hey man, this sucks. Get better. And I leave them alone. And when I see that, it's a very powerful thing. When I find that individual that I know I can do that with, but I got to know that person. I got to know that person at a fairly deep level to know they're not going to go sit in the corner and cry if I do that. Okay. So it's a rare individual. All that to say, don't do that unless you just absolutely know. And I'm telling you, with 20 years of teaching experience, it's very rare. I've met maybe 2 students that have ever come through my classroom that I would be comfortable doing that with. Okay. In general, you're not going to be in that situation. Almost always, you're going to be in this situation of, okay, we see you got this. You went away, said you were going to do these things over the weekend. Here we are. It's Wednesday. It's not even the weekend now, right? It's not even Monday, and we're still not done. What's going on? What are you missing? Do you need something, or did we not get something to you? Help us understand why this is not done. Could have had a death in the family, right? Could have had a death in the family. Could have had a car accident. They were without transportation for 3 days and just afraid to say anything to the group. They were embarrassed, whatever the case may be. Find out what's going on, find out what we need to be successful, and just go from there. And sometimes it's just simply somebody took on a role and as they actually got into it and understand what it was, they realized they didn't have the skill set and they weren't quite sure how to ask for help. Okay, let's talk about, okay, what do you need? This is something that this other group member can help with. Let's have them point you in the right direction. We go from there. Okay. If you don't at least try to have the conversations about what do you need to be successful, you're probably not going to be successful. Okay. So again, I know it's easy for me to say, harder to do, but that's just some things to think about. Questions, comments, complaints? You guys know what to do. If you don't, we've got to fix that. It is way too late in the semester to not know what we need to do. It's okay if you're still trying to figure it out, but. Yes, all yours.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.